Hi, my name is Pat, and this is my channel, Book Chat with Pat, and I'm glad that you're here. Today is Saturday, April 6th, and this is my weekly wrap up. My big reading project for this month is reading Les Miserables by Victor Hugo, which I'm reading with Classics and Company. This is a first read for me of this massive classic. I made really good progress this week. The text of the novel, not including footnotes, is about 1,300 pages long, and I read about 400 pages of it this week. So that feels like a pretty good start. I am amazed at how clear the prose is in this edition and how easy it is for me to get drawn into the story. I think that this particular translation, this is the newest translation, the Christine Donougher translation. I think that is a big part of why I'm finding this text so accessible. She is so clear and direct in her prose, and I just got pulled right into the story. This will be an ongoing reading project well into the middle of May. My book group met this week to discuss Beyond That, the Sea by Laura Spence-Ash. I didn't feel like I should talk about it until after we had met, but now that we've met, I can give a little review of it. This is a novel that begins during World War II, and which extends through the 1940s through the 1970s and ends in 1977. This is the story of Beatrix Thompson, who is sent from London to America during the bombing of London. In an effort to keep her safe, her parents decide to send her, their only child, to live with an American family, the Gregorys, who have two young boys, one older than Beatrix and one a little bit younger. Beatrix adapts to life away from her parents surprisingly quickly. Her new American family embraces her, and she becomes quite American in a short period of time. The two boys in the Gregory house both like her and accept her as a sister and then as something more, but that's another part of the story. Both Mr. and Mrs. Gregory love having a daughter. The Thompsons, of course, back in London, do not fare as well, having been separated from their daughter and only child, who is becoming more and more American with every letter that she writes home. Beatrix is then called home abruptly after the war ends, but the novel goes on to cover the events of the next 30 years and describes how the lives of these two families continue to intersect. There are aspects of the story that are really lovely. However, there are some very definite things that really bothered me about this book. The story is told from the point of view of all of the characters. Two sets of parents, Beatrix and the two boys, William and Gerald, all alternate as the focus of the narrative. But the author only spends usually about 2 to 4 pages on a character before leaving that character and going on to another character. And the novel goes on like this throughout the whole novel, except for one small section in the middle where the point of view just goes back and forth between two characters. But most of the novel is told by focusing on all of these characters. I feel like because each of the chapters, if you will, from a different character's point of view, because they're so short, the author never really gives herself enough time or space to develop the narrative. You no sooner get into what's happening with a particular character than that chapter ends and we're on to somebody else. And it made, to me, for a very disjointed and jarring reading experience. My other difficulty with the book is the way the author writes dialogue. In the first part and in the third part of the book, all dialogue is written in italics with no distinction between, when one character stops talking and the next character responds. There'll just be these blocks of italics, and you have to figure out who's talking and who's responding. There are no quotation marks and there are no signifiers to indicate that somebody has stopped speaking and that somebody else has started speaking. Then in the middle section, that doesn't happen anymore. The middle section, which is just between Beatrix and William, the dialogue is written in quotation marks with signifiers telling us who is speaking, and every time a new character speaks, the paragraph changes. So it's just like written in a very straightforward way as dialogue normally is written. Then we go back to the third part of the novel, and the dialogue goes back to being written in these blocks of italics where you can't tell who's speaking and when they stop speaking and when somebody else starts speaking. I don't know why she did this. We're left to decipher the dialogue, and yet there's nothing in this novel that is that complex, that warrants this kind of extra work. The novel is written in a relatively straightforward style. The plot is relatively straightforward, but the dialogue seems almost deliberately obscure, and I don't get why that was. We discussed this in our book group, and everybody was as frustrated by this, and nobody really could come up with a good theory as to why that happened. It just seemed to be a stylistic decision that didn't ultimately make sense. I don't want to include any spoilers about the plot, but I also felt like a lot of characters in this story were done away with almost gratuitously. I'm not going to say any more about it than that. This was a debut novel. It's not a bad first effort, but it's not a book that I'm going to be quick to recommend either. I'm also participating in People April, being led by Roz at Scallydandling About the Books and Elizabeth at Bookins and Books. The group read-along is Maggie O'Farrell's memoir, I Am, 17 Brushes with Death. To date, I have read her first 5 near-death experiences. Each chapter is entitled A Different Part of the Body, to signify the part of the body most affected by the brush with death that is going to be described in that chapter. Her very first brush with death in the first chapter is truly terrifying, and it left me really shaken. I haven't read enough of the book to say much more. I love Maggie O'Farrell as a novelist. But this memoir, at least so far, is not for the faint of heart. To be continued. In preparation for this past week's Poetry Thursday episode on Linda Paston, I reread many of her poems in her various collections, and I read in its entirety her final book, Almost an Elegy, New and Later Selected Poems. Linda Paston is a poet that I have loved and followed for 45 years. This collection contains poems from the last 5 of her 16 books of poetry, as well as 33 new poems. It was published in 2022, a year before she died at the age of 90. I recently had occasion to watch her reading from this final volume. It was extremely poignant to hear her read what would be her final poems in what may have been her final public appearance. The poems are not maudlin or self-pitying. She maintains her precise diction in the muted power that characterizes all of her poetry. But she writes here in this last volume with an acute sense of the passage of time and a profound awareness of her own mortality. I have loved this poet's work for all of my adult life, and I think that this last book is one that I will read and reread well into my own old age. Excuse me. Allergies bothering my throat. My book group has chosen James by Percival Everett to read for this month. This is his long-awaited new novel, his retelling of the adventures of Huckleberry Finn from the perspective of the slave Jim. Okay, I may have campaigned for this one within my book group more than I usually do, but this is going to be a really important book. And I'll talk about it here again soon. I'm also going to be a judge in the BookTube quarterfinals, this time for fiction. I'm on my second book now in this new group of 6 books. We're not supposed to review books from the round of judging until the judging is over, so I'll come back to this topic again soon. Finally, this week I read the graphic novel The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood with artwork by Renee Nault. This was my 12th book in the Read 24 in 2024 Banned Book Challenge, sponsored by the extraordinary MJ at Reading This Life. Margaret Atwood's novel and this graphic novel version are currently, this school year, currently on banned book lists in numerous communities in 10 different states. I'm doing a separate video, an entire video just on this novel, which will post next week. So that's it for this week. It was a good week, good beginning to April. I feel more focused than I felt in March, so that's going according to plan so far. I feel like I made a good dent in the 2 group reads that I'm doing. So that's it for this week. As always, thank you for watching. I hope that you're doing well. I'll speak with you again soon. Take care.